Welcome to Surviving the Dream with your hosts, Casey Arnold
and David Conley.
We're here to talk to people who seem to have their dream job and find out, what did it take? Is it what they imagined? Is it worth it? How do they do it?
Join us as we uncover the secrets of surviving the dream. British Dave.
Oh, good. You announced yourself for the episode and everything. Hello, British Dave.
Hello, I'm British Dave today. I've been told I'm British Dave today.
I mean, you're British Dave every time, but when we have another Dave on, we need some way to differentiate. So why not call you out by where you're from?
Well, it took me a long time to get used to that because I always thought I was English until I came to America and then go, no, you're British. I think it took me a few years to accept that actually I am British.
That's right. Sorry, because we're not good at the smart side of it, but you get the joy of correcting us, which is part of being British.
I'm now American enough to know that geography is an issue in this country. I do understand
want
that.
to defend us, but it's really not a strength of mine, so I can't. So the reason that we are calling you that today is because our guest today is also named Dave. I think we should just bring him on so people don't have to get a geography lesson.
Are we going to call him American Dave for the rest of the podcast? Is that it now?
I mean, we could, but I don't know. I think we could come up with something better than that. We'll see. We'll see what pops up. He is currently the EP of the RUGRATS reboot. I don't know if you watched RUGRATS Going Up, the original. So fucking good. He is also a creator. He co-created Robot and Monster, super funny show. And he worked on the Boss Baby series. He's a very talented, super creative guy. Let's welcome Dave Pressler, otherwise known as, American Dave.
Hello, American Dave. How lovely to meet you. And
very nice to meet you too, British Dave. And Casey, good to see you again.
Yeah, this is like my new way of catching up with my friends. How sad is that?
We're going to get Casey's mum on in a few weeks. She hasn't seen him for a while, so she's coming on.
That could be entertaining.
Yeah. Well, it's thanks for letting me join you guys. And because Casey, you and I worked together on Robot Monster, 13 years ago, eek.
I know. How did that go by so quickly? That's one of those shows. It was so good. I don't understand why it didn't go on. I feel like some years things go like under the radar and gems get buried. What do you think the reason was?
Yeah. I have a couple of theories about this. And one is that, as happens in animation, we were unfortunately there when there was a big regime change. Because Brown Johnson, who was the president of the studio at the time, she was huge fan of Robot Monster, and she basically was, it was her baby. She greenlit it. She was our biggest champion. And so when they let her go from the studio, it was kind of like, well, who cares? I think New York and who was running the network at the time really were kind of like, okay, whatever. And not only that, but I think there was a little bit of a rivalry between what was going on in New York and Brown Johnson here on the West Coast. And it was kind of like, well, this is her thing. So, and they had just gotten Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And they were going to put a lot of juice behind that because that was like, I don't know, $65 million acquisition at the time or something, which, doesn't sound that big in today's dollars. But so I think it was bad timing. But, the silver lining of all that was, one, I agree with you, best creative experience in animation I've ever had. Best crew. Also, I look at that show and it turned out just, so much better than I could have ever imagined. And so the fact that we have one fantastic season that's out there to be seen by all is really the best.
That's true. At least you can still have the creative pride and not worry about getting swallowed up in the outside stuff. So is Animator the dream? What? Because I know you come from a less traditional animation start background.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was always interested in animation, but I grew up in like a suburb of Chicago where it was very blue collar, and being an artist was not really a viable you know, people are like, oh, you're really good at art, but what are you really going to do? And even though my dad was a commercial artist, you know, but he, you know, I think he struggled with the business end of it. He was a good commercial artist, but I think it was tough for him, you know.
What does that mean, Dave, as a commercial artist? What kind of stuff was he doing?
Commercial artist, he was doing, for instance, this is back in like the 60s and 70s. So, you know, he was doing illustrations for magazines. There was a magazine called the American Bar Association Journal. Sounds very dry, but he used to do a ton of illustrations for that magazine. Scholastic, like school stuff, for textbooks, slideshows, you know, you name it. Back in the days before, you know, it was photographs and Photoshop, you would just have people illustrate think about every textbook you had when you were a kid and all that stuff. So that was basically seen as commercial illustration.
He was helping us make math interesting. Sally has 4 apples.
but surely you must have seen a pathway with that. If your father is doing a job like that, it's not a million miles away, is it? It's not. I thought you were going to say, oh, he was working on cars or something. But no, this is.
Yeah, and no, you're absolutely correct. There was a pathway. But the funny thing is he was very discouraging in the sense that he always told me, he was like, well, don't take it on as a profession because it will, you know, it will take all the joy out of it. So he was kind of like, don't go to art school, don't, you know. But the thing I realized later as an adult was I think the joy was out of it for him. You know, it wasn't necessarily going to be that way for me. So I actually... one of the things I did when I was first here in the 80s, I moved to California and Los Angeles in 85. And I was an actor. I did theater. I did improv comedy. I did a dusting of TV stuff, a little bit of, so I really liked performing and I kind of saw that as my first thing. But then what happened was I had a couple of buddies from Chicago. They moved out here. And this is about like 1992, 93. And they were both like writer, want to be director, want to be producer. And they were kind of like, well, you always used to draw. So let's do this crazy like puppetry stuff, kid stuff. And you can design the characters. I'm like, yeah, I'll design the characters. So driven by kind of like, you know, ignorance. And yeah, I got a pencil, I'll get some paper. And we just all started to work like that. So I never had any formal training in art, but what I did is I just came at it with a backpack full of ignorance, which I think can propel you forward. You're like, well, this will be cool. Let's do this, you know. So that's where it kind of began.
Learned what you were doing as you were going?
Yes, which made it really difficult.
You have come very far. Sorry, British Dave.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of intrigued about this thing because we're about like surviving the dream. And you brought up something really interesting, I think, when you said your father was kind of doing what some people would consider a dream job, but he lost the joy. Can you explain that a little bit? And has that ever happened to you?
Yeah. I think it's a real thing because, well, one of the things is he was a very good he loved he did oil painting when he in his free time, and he would oil paint. He loved to do like 1800s like Civil War, that era of, you know, of men and women, and I'm trying to think of what the genre would be like. You know, he has this great painting that I got from him when he passed away, and he called it Cemetery Dance. And it's just that in the 1800s, cemeteries were more like a park where people would spend time and not seen as something, you know, you only go to when you're visiting a dead person. But basically, so what it was is they would do these things where it would be like a harvest ball or something. And so they'd light up torches. They would have food and dancing in the cemetery. So he did this picture of these all these people in these 1800s clothes dancing in the cemetery, and it was this fantastic painting. But I remember the one thing is I used to go to his studio as an adult. It's just a little room in his house. And he had that painting and I loved it. And I said, could I have that painting? He goes, yeah, of course. Let me just, the moon's not quite right, or the tree, let me just, and years went by, and every time I came to visit, I'd be like, when are you going to, no, I just wanted a little more. So then when he died, I'm finally like, I'm taking this. This is the whole idea of kind of procrastination, perfectionism. It was never quite right. He never quite had the confidence to do a gallery show. So I think there was maybe some anxiety, maybe some procrastination that as I started to get art, I saw in myself. I was doing the same thing where I would start paintings and not finish them. And I was experiencing that idea that the idea in your head is always, it's perfect, it's done. But then when you start to actually go through the problems, and this is true with writing, with creating shows, with anything, that there's now you have to do the work of like, putting the puzzle together. And not only are you putting the puzzle together, you're making the pieces as you're putting the puzzle together. And so this was one of the psychological hurdles that I had to kind of push myself to get over.
It's at the chasing perfection. Are you talking about, so that becomes an obstacle rather than actually a help.
Yeah, and I think not only an obstacle, but I think it's a psychological. I think for me, it felt like it was a hindrance through. You're trying to protect yourself too, because what if I put this art out there and everyone hates it? It's really personal. They're rejecting you. So if it's never done, well, it's never up for criticism. Then is it? So it's just, it's a little bit like keeping your insecurities at bay by never really finishing anything.
That is definitely hard in our business, right? Because there's so many phases of notes. It's like, okay, here it is. Tell me what's wrong. Okay, I'll fix it. And then you can tell me what's wrong now. Okay, just keep telling me all the things I've done wrong. I love my job.
But this sounds something different than that. This seems like that there's a difference between I'm creating my art and someone might never see that, and then actually doing it for a living. So am I right in saying that that's the difference that you're talking about?
Yes. I think you're correct, because part of what you're talking about, Casey, is when when we have a job and a deadline and stuff, I can become a little bit more of a technician and a mechanic and be like, all right, I can do those notes. I can deliver on this. I know what the mission is. And then you have that force of one, you have, the forces above you or whoever hired you to say yes, no, taller, thinner, whatever it is. Then, but then there's, it's done because it's Thursday and it's due. Right. Whereas in our personal lives, we have that thing we're tinkering with, the graphic novel, the script, whatever it is. And it's always like, well, you do a pass on it and then you look at it and then you walk away from it for a month and you're like, well, it's not quite right. And then you rewrite or you redraw and then you look at it. And it's just always this kind of, it's a bit of a torture because like you were saying, David, it's having sometimes a deadline in the real world, but then the personal project is like, once I release it, then it's up for criticism, it's up for failure, it's up for people not buying it, whatever it is.
But I was having that conversation this weekend with some writers, and they said it's a difference between being a playwright and writing for television and film. Like as a playwright, what you write is what you write. And you're not going to get notes. It's either going to fly or it's not. If it's TV, I hate to say it, but we're writing for money, basically, aren't we? We have to because it's that's the way it's going to get made or it's not. Whereas a play, you can put it on a black box theatre, and it's like that's my art. That's it.
How do you feel like you get over the hump of putting it into the world, right? Because the first time you got paid, did you automatically find the way to make that disconnect, or were you like, oh shit, they're paying me now I guess I just have to be anxious and do it anyway?
Well, I think I was the first times I got hired to do art for TV or character design. I was so thrilled that I did feel like like a technician, like I was, like a blue collar worker doing a job, and you want this and it's supposed to be that, great. I will put my skills to make your thing the way it's supposed to be. As a matter of fact, I worked in special effects for a while in the mid '90s, and so I was a sculptor. I actually kind of got into sculpting, and it was one of those things where once I got into it, I took to it rather quickly. So I got hired, and I remember we were working on this big project once, and it was for. Do you remember that there was a book series, Goosebumps,
Mm-hmm.
and they had a CD-ROM, and a lot of people, turns out they loved that because this was like mid '90s, and the CD-ROM choose your own adventure Goosebumps thing. But it was a huge DreamWorks project, so we were sculpting monsters, and we did 50 monster heads, and then hero monsters, a werewolf, and mummies and zombies. So the shop I was working at, we had 6 sculptors at a giant long table working on, and so I was working on a zombie or something like that, and the guy next to me was working on a mummy, and so the production designer would come in and visit at the end of the week, and he'd look at everyone's stuff, and you'd have your, the art you were given, and he'd have notes and these wouldn't be notes technical. They'd be more creative, let's make his face a little longer. Can we make those eyes look more sad? Whatever it was. My feeling when that day came was yep, whatever you need, I will make this happen. And then I remember the guy next to me, he was always kind of pushing back when the production designer was giving notes, or the art director, and he was always pushing back. And then the art director would go away, and he'd be like, "Man, I just think this mummy should be like this, and it should be like that, and his teeth should be like." And it's really frustrating when they give it. And I remember turning to him, I go, "It's their mummy. Just do it their way. Go home and make your own mummy if you want to, I said, "What do you care? Just do the mummy they want to do." And that became a kind of a mantra to me. Make the mummy for them.
Yeah.
When you're being the sculptor, when you're being the artist, put your skills to work delivering for them. Then when you're at home, make your own stuff. That's fun, interesting.
I think that's a very healthy way of looking at it. I think I feel like that as a writer. Certainly, I write. Once the biggest problem I find as a writer is the minute that they paid you, you go, it's no longer mine.
Right, please don't mess it up.
Well, I think it's I go further and I say, well, it's no longer mine. They're going to do what I have to do. It's now theirs, or we have to do what they want. And I feel like it's going back to what I was saying to this playwright at the weekend. They don't have that issue, but they don't make much money out of life.
And there's still plenty of opportunities where you bring your skills, you bring your ideas, you bring problem solving techniques into the work you're doing. I think that's why when you talk about the playwright, I started to do. There's a lot of underground or let's call them alt art galleries in LA. There's a whole kind of scene. So I started to actually do paintings because I would go to some of these places like La Luz Jesus, and that place used to have a place on Melrose, and there used to be a magazine, Juxtapose magazine, and all High Fructose, and it was all alternative art scene, I guess, as opposed to the Mocha or something like that. Right. But when I went to these shows and would see what people are painting, these artists were pretty much doing whatever they wanted. And that was exciting to me. I was like, wait, so I can just kind of dream up anything, like we're talking about the zombie, So I just started to paint whatever I wanted. And I had lots of characters, robots, occasional zombie in there, stuff like that. And the thing was, is I eventually, again, like we were talking about, it took me a while to get the courage up to paint something and then take it to a gallery and say, I'd love to show this. But once I started to do it, I actually got a lot of traction. It was like people were buying my stuff. Gallerists liked working with me. They liked my stuff. And so that became the playwriting for me because I'm no notes. And I actually, unlike my dad, I got a lot of joy out of that free form of I'm just going to do a series of robots wearing suits and or whatever the thing was. And I would get a lot of pleasure out of that. And you also have a deadline, which is good. It's the combination of both. There's going to be an art show on the 15th. You got 3 months. And then I set off to do it,
So you've got almost 2 lives as an artist, it sounds like. I mean, that's ultimate surviving the dream, I would have thought.
If we're talking about surviving the dream in this type of business, you're talking about many hats. You're talking about because I always supplemented my income, and I still do, because I still do gallery shows. I did one. I just had one month ago downtown. It was really great. But I definitely, it's a creative outlet, and you make a little extra money. Then it's also doing freelance design work. Even while I'm here at RUGRATS, I work with the development department within Nickelodeon, and when they're developing shows, sometimes they'll have a writer that needs some what they call viz dev, visual development. And so, I'll join in and do some extra work to try and bring that show to life. So the cool thing is that it always stays interesting, and you have to wear those many different hats to kind of keep the dream afloat, so to speak.
How do you balance them all?
Sometimes it's just exhausting. I don't know if there's balance. Sometimes I just, I did a show in Telluride, Colorado. It's a little town. We have a place there. There's a great gallery there that I've done business with for about 10 years. And I try to do a show there every other year. But sometimes I'm just cranking out those paintings, and I start painting in January for a show that's going to be in August. And I just have to dedicate a lot of evenings and weekends. And even though it's fun, there are times when it's just tiring. And I have to be like, okay, had a big work day today. Let's have dinner, and then go downstairs to my office and paint for the rest of the night, even if you don't really feel like it.
Does your dad creep into your head when you do that, and he's like, "See this is what I meant."
Yeah, because I could see I could see where there was, but you know what? There's another thing too. Is I to go back to my dad a little bit. The good thing was, in the sense that he always felt, because as I started to have success with it, he was always very supportive. He was always very happy for me, because he felt like, oh, you're doing something that I never could do, whether it was from anxiety or whatever held him back. Because when I would tell him, like, I'm doing this character design job, and oh my God, this is how much they're paying me. And my dad was like, wow, that's great.
You are living the dream for both of us.
Exactly. Even though, to be honest, like in those early years, there were many years where it was like I was struggling to pay the rent, because I was still driving a delivery truck, trying to do my design skills at night, and with my partners trying to like put together a pitch. And then we'd get something, get a development deal or something. You have to put a lot of time into it. So eventually I had to quit the delivery driving job. And now I'm just making or not making a living on my design work. And, that was very up and down for a lot of years.
What kept you going during that period when you were driving the delivery van? What made you go, this is worth it? No, I'm dropping off packages, go, no, this is worth it.
You know what? It's because I was just hitting an age where I remember I turned 30 in 94. And I remember right around that time with the acting stuff and with having a day job, it was just starting to be like, what do I really want to accomplish? I don't know if I can just how long do I want to do this for? And when my partners at that time came along, we all just were like, we could make TV shows. Let's put all of our energy into it. And we used to just get just enough of a nibble, just enough of a success, or, a little development deal here and there. Or my one partner would get a script, or I'd get hired to do some characters. It was just enough to keep going a bit more, because I knew I just didn't want to be scrambling around,
and you were in Los Angeles at that point.
Yeah. definitely. Because I moved to Los Angeles in '85, didn't really start pursuing the TV design work until about, I'd say '94 was the first time we got if you remember back then in '94, Fox Television was having success with Simpsons. And remember they had like Capital Critters and what was the one about, there was a family dog that one that Tim Burton did. So they were trying all these shows to kind of be wild. And so they had a wing of production called Fox Lab Studios. And it was run by, I think it was Pam Brady and Brian Graydon. Pam Brady did a lot of work with South Park guys after that. So, but what they were trying to do was find weird new stuff to put on the air. We had this puppet short we called Stupid Land that we did in hopes of getting on MTV. And it was these little weird church puppets we found. And we made this puppet called Pud. And he was basically a fleshy blob who would vomit all the time when he got nervous. And we had like a vomit tube, and he would vomit on the dad and the daughter. And they had a friend that lived next door called Mr. Guts. And he was actually, we went to the grocery store, bought livers and stuff, and made a puppet out of meat with 2 eyeballs sticking out of it. So that was what we were doing. And they saw this tape and they were like, this is interesting. What else you guys want to do? And we had an idea for an all puppet sitcom called Beyond Family. And it was just as weird. It was like we had this kind of suburban family, but then the daughter was going out with Pud, who vomited all the time. They had a dog who had a lawnmower accident, so he only had 2 limbs, and he would drive around in a wagon. They were bully characters. So we put all of our eggs in this basket. I mean, at the time, I think they gave us like $50,000 to do a pilot. And we thought, oh my God, it's so much money. Well, of course, I mean, we were totally struggling because we were trying to build all these puppets and sets. We did it, but oh my God, but the whole idea we were doing, that was when we got an opportunity to do a pilot. Nothing ever happened with it, but the great thing is between making Stupid Land and making Beyond Family, it gave us a bunch more once you have stuff, once you've made things, how weird they are, it was something you could use as a calling card. You could have me based on that. We had done just before all this. We had come up with an idea to do these interview things, puppet on the street. We had Gak and Flem. One was kind of a monkey alien. One was an alien with like a weird headstock. And I designed them. We had this puppet guy at the Kyoto Brothers make them for us. And we back then, think about it, like 93. I mean, you had to shoot stuff on Betamax cameras. So we had to like talk this guy with a Betamax camera to go out with us on Hollywood Boulevard on the weekend. And the puppets would interview people. They interviewed tourists. We'd go to Wacko's Toys and interview somebody there. And then you just shoot in front of like a rock and roll club on Saturday night until someone kicked you out, because it was harder than but you think about it now, we got so much of that stuff that when you say, oh yeah, puppets interviewing celebrities, it's like, at that time, it was very hard. And I always think about, we interviewed like Billy Barty. I don't know if you remember him from all of those, great old movies and stuff like that. And but we also, I remember in the early 90s, we had this connection with Fox, and we were just trying to find any celebrities to let us interview them with the puppets. And so they said, well, there's this new show coming out, and if you want to, we can give you the cast of this new show and you can interview them. And it's about these high schoolers in Beverly Hills. It's called Beverly Hills 90210. We were like, no, that sounds really stupid. We want to, and we totally blew that off. And I'm thinking, that'd be a great tape to have right now.
That would be fun.
This is fascinating because to me it seems like it's the making of which is what got you to that next level. Because you brought up something like, I was living in London and I used to come to LA every now and again because for an ego boost, because it's a town that can basically kill you with encouragement, because everybody seems to arrive at LAX and then go to a meeting with an agent or an executive who tells you you're extremely talented, and then I used to go back to Heathrow and get kicked in the goolies again. But I think what makes a difference is the actual making. I mean, I sometimes think when you walk into a coffee shop in Los Angeles and you go, "Oh my God, is anybody here a writer?" And then suddenly, like, everybody in the room. But it's the actual making, I think, sets you apart, doesn't it?
Yes, my motto I tell people is you're never going to go wrong making something, because everyone has an idea,
right?
Everyone has something in their head, and I'm just like, no, write it down or draw it, paint it, do it, because the main thing is if you, like I said, if you make something, and we're talking back in the 90s, it was like you have these tapes, we cut together these tapes of all of our stuff. And if somebody asked you, well, what kind of stuff do you want to do? And you could hand them a tape and go watch this.
Mm-hmm.
Then it would be a matter of like, oh, these guys have actually made stuff before. And even now, I think we're even more in an era of, think about it, you can just shoot animated stuff on your phone,
It's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I do. Do you feel like that's a good thing now, that we can, like, it seems to be more of a free for all, that really anybody could make something if they've got an iPhone?
Yeah. Because I think it's good because, well, one, there's going to be, of course, the signal to noise ratio is going to be, much higher for the noise. Mm-hmm. But obviously, we're getting a whole bunch of new talented people who are just able to do stuff. Because just like what I was talking about, it's so expensive to do things earlier,
But plus the making of stuff, aside from having the calling card, it also gives you the confidence to be able to be like, oh, I can do that. I have had an idea and realize it to the finish. And everyone you do, you always learn something, right? So by the time someone's paying you, you're like, I am so glad I made those 3 things that no one else will ever see, because I now know not to do A, B, and C. And I can show you P over here, which turned out great because I've learned a lot between now and then.
Oh, yeah. Because even in the process of making something that may never see the light of day, you're still working things out. Just to go back to Robot and Monster, I probably, Casey, you probably heard, the unusual way that it got pitched. But what it was is, so I had an idea for these characters, and you got to understand that just being around the environment I was with my partners and everything, one of the things we would do is, like, there would always be this need for, like, what kind of characters, could we use for a show or for something else? And so if I had an idea for a character, I would draw it up. I would just, like, make it. And so one time there was this art show coming up, and the whole theme of it was like, it was like tortured friendships or something like that. And so I had this idea for this robot and this monster. And the monster was all feelings and caring and dreams. And the robot was just always like, but they're best friends. And so I did 3 paintings of them in different, like a triptych of them in different kind of, like monsters holding robot's hand. And he has just like hearts and flowers over his head. And then a robot just has a cloud and it's just monster on fire, so so that's where it started. And then I had this idea. We did, my partners and I did a show. It was like the last big thing we did. We did a show called The Save-Ems. It was a preschool show, aired around 2002. But that was the time where we always did live action stuff. When we did The Save-Ems, I worked with one other designer, Nathan Cabrera. I sculpted the characters. I designed them. We designed vehicles, and we designed this whole world. And then when it came time to animate it, we worked with a studio in Canada. And so the idea that we were storyboarding, designing, doing animatics and stuff like that was really the first time I got a taste of animation. I was like, wait, this is where I belong, because this is like the best of everything that I want to do. My partners, not so much. They like live action. They found animation boring because it's like, where's the set? Where's the, we're waiting for shots to come in, and, then we review them and then we sit there. So we're having this disconnect. And one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to do kind of almost like a Seinfeld type sitcom with robots in it, where you got a robot, he has a dumb job, and he has his friends, and you have this robot world. So basically, had been drawing up art, coloring it in Photoshop, almost as if I had a place for this to go. So what happened is I just had all this stuff with robot and monster and the robot world. And so out of the blue, in 2008, I got an email from Burke Rawlings, who's the VP of development at Nick. They had seen my website with my art because they were looking for new artists, new looks. And the email was just simply, hey, we like your art. You want to just come have a meeting? Tell me what you want to do. And
that's a dream phone call.
And so what I always tell people is, if you have an idea or something like that, always be working on it as if, because you never know when that opportunity, so when he called me, the great thing is I had tons of art for that. And back then it was more like I printed it out. And I actually had sculpted 2 maquettes of Robot and Monster, little models of them a long time ago, like a couple of years before that moment, as part of my gallery stuff where I was showing weird toys and stuff like that. So when I went into that meeting, I had this no script because I'm not a writer, but I had this fully formed idea of a robot and a monster, and they have jobs and they have stupid friends, and it's, and so at that point, the great serendipity is that Burke, the VP of development, had just had a meeting with Josh and Jen, maybe like 2 weeks before, and said, I just met these 2 comedy writers. I think you guys might make a good fit. Sent me a pilot that they did. It was a buddy comedy that was really dark and funny.
Yep.
And I had lunch with those guys, and we all got along. And then when I showed them the stuff for Robot and Monster, I just, again, since I wasn't a writer, all I did was I sat for 3 days, and any idea I had, I just wrote it down. I sent them every bit of art I had, and then we synthesized it into a show. And then we went in and pitched it.
So is that the show that fully transitioned you to being an animator?
Yes.
Strong open, Dave.
Dave, I want to ask this question about as an artist, where you are on the with AI. Is it a help or a hindrance for you? I mean, I was came in very cynical the other week, going, "Oh no, AI," and then I must admit I am using it more and more, and going, "Oh, it's really helping me." So, how do you feel as an artist?
You know what? I'm using it as a tool right now too, because being a non-writer who's really, and on top of it, a bad typist, I love ChatGPT to help me do stuff like,
right.
I need a blurb about this thing. I got an idea, because if it spits out 4 blurbs for me, at least there's some sentences in there and stuff that I can pull out and use, and it'll be like a creative icebreaker. So I've used Midjourney in a similar way, because there's been a couple times where on stuff I'm working on for me personally, I'm trying to come up with ideas for let's say a laboratory or a machine or a spaceship. And I'm like, I'm tired of my old shape language that I sketch a million times. And it will, if I type in a bunch of prompts, I'll get this shape language that's so weird and out of what I would think of, or these color schemes or design layouts.
Right.
And where it gives me a new idea, like, oh, well, yeah, what if I do that instead? What if I put 3 of them and it's a domed ceiling, not a square ceiling, and it's just enough to kind of send me off to, in a good direction, new, fresh direction.
You use it for inspiration more, or where else do you get inspiration?
I think inspiration a lot. The other inspirations I get, I think there's so many artists I love, graphic novels I love. When you look at, other people doing digital art, like non-AI digital art, production design and stuff like that, and visual development. I always find that that's fascinating. It always gives me, good ideas. Like right now, I'm going to be done working on Rugrats in January, and as of today, I've been here for 5 years, longest job I've
Wow.
ever had in my life.
Wow.
I don't
And
even
are
think
you-
I was free driving for 5 years straight.
It is good to have a long job like that. So now that you've made it to the top and you've had a long sustaining thing, like how does the idea of what you thought it would be compare to the reality of it?
Well, I think there's a couple things that, as we all know, all three of us here, and maybe more, that even in your dream job, there's going to be days where you're just like, man, it's going to be tough to go to work. You got chores you don't want to do. But even within that realm, I think it's my favorite thing. I think the big thing that's missing for me right now is it's the work from home. So many people are working remote that as you guys know, there's something about having a writer's room, having a design team, in-house, having, my directors and the writers. Cause I mean, I worked on Boss Baby, the TV show, for 2 seasons as art director. And one of the things I love there is Brendan Sawyer was the showrunner, and he was such an open, I learned a lot from him because he was so open to the best idea wins, and that it was just an open, creative environment. When I would get a script and I would be production designing the idea for the set or something like that, I would always have additional jokes in mind, like, it'd be funny. What if we did this instead of that? And he goes out that, and I would always pitch him stuff based on, from design, I've come up with an idea. Here's another gag. And he'd be like, oh yeah, let's put that in. That's good. And Robot Monster, you remember Casey, is a lot the same. Like,
Yeah.
Josh and Jeff were very open to best idea wins, several bites apple of like getting a creative done.
I was just going to say, do you think in person is coming back, or do you think remote is like the new way of being?
Boy, I was hopeful because I started this gig in 19, and then, was that March of 20, we all went home. And, that was the last time I remember the studio just being bustling, like the old days. And there, when we would have groups of people come in, or there were many times when, me and my co-EP and supervising director, Casey Leonard, we get a new script with a new, Rugrats adventure in it. Like, they have a lot of fantasies. So we do everything. We do fairy tales. We do castles and space and, jungles and Jurassic Park. And so when we would get one of these fantasy episodes, nothing's better than to go in one of these conference rooms they have here where the walls are covered with a paint that's basically a dry erase board. So, fistful of markers, dry erase board, we'd spread the script out and we would just start to draw and come up with ideas. And of course, the Kate Bouclier and Rachel Littman are other EPs who are handled, they run the show and were writing, the head writers of the show. And we'd hit them with an idea, and just to have that creative mix, everyone's in the same room, it's happening. You can come up with an idea there, and 2 minutes later, you're in the office pitching it and improving upon it. And then I could go talk to my design team immediately, or my design supervisor. And just that energy, I think it always makes things better.
Yeah.
Always makes things better. I'm not sure, Casey, what the future is going to be, if people will come back, because I know a lot of people have been doing this for a long time, and some of them are like me, where they miss the camaraderie and the creative engagement, and some are like, "Oh, I'm never coming back."
Yeah,
I'm going to be remote.
I agree with you, but I do agree as well that I think there are people who have made that decision. They moved. They used the pandemic to move far away, change their lives, and go, "I'm not coming back if you want me. Zoom me."
It does complicate things.
Yeah.
Maybe we can find a 50-50, and those people who are never coming back can stay remote, and those of us who still miss human interaction can get at least a few days of that.
I think that's happening, but the hybrid is tough, because and I think unfortunately it leads to resentment as well on both sides.
Way to bring the room up, British Dave.
I think I'm just going on what you're saying. Is that I agree that I like it. I much prefer life in person, but I do feel that we have moved on to. I mean, certainly like for a performance perspective, I don't think there's ever going to be in-person casting again. And yet I would advise any actor to say, if you can get in a room with the casting director and the director, that's the best. And I think that's possibly not going to happen now.
That's a good point. I know we have to get into our questions, but I have one question before we do that. When you were talking about your dad's cemetery dance painting, please tell me that you're going to animate that at some point, because it sounds like a fascinating scene.
Boy, I don't know. It's pretty good the way it is. I think if I tried to animate it, I'd only make it worse.
No, all right. I don't want you to make your dad's memory worse, but my little writer brain got excited, so you might be getting a little short scene from me.
I'll send you a picture of the piece of artwork. It's pretty cool. Well, and it's funny because from an animation standpoint, I'm not necessarily one to, do the animation from soup to nuts, or to take animation. I've done stop motion animation. I did a series for Dreamworks TV called How to Do Everything with Garrick and Marvin. It was these two stupid robots who would invent. They'd try to learn something, so they'd invent an invention to be the shortcut, and always literally blow up in their faces. And so, but I mean, that was just really, I did those in like 3.5 minutes of animation in like a week and a half. So I was cutting corners, and I found it's really, it's such a concentrated medium, and it's so hard to do that I think what I like to do is be on the designing end, be on the figuring end, and then let people who are really good at animating do it,
Mm-hmm. You're a mastermind.
Well, with that, we're going to have to move to questions. We ask the guests the same questions every week because we can't think of any new ones at the end. But we get different answers, so that's always good. So I want to know, American Dave, if you won the lottery, the big one, what would you do?
Let's see. What would I do? I think within what we were talking about, I think the one thing I would do is I would probably do bigger art stuff, that I like get like actually like have a warehouse, have a staff, have, what I mean? Have like, so we could do big, crazy stuff. Cause the other thing too, is like when you make big stuff, you got to store it. So just to have that storage space and to have like, a factory where it was simply for, we're probably never going to see a dime because that's the case. But you could do these big art installations, and you could probably, I'd love to like fund other people's art projects. Then you could really get into some like, I'm doing this. Here's an animated short idea. It's probably never going to make any money. So let's just dump a bunch of money into it. Have a great time doing it. Hire really talented people. I think that would be it. It would just be, I don't know. It sounds corny, but like Dream Factory. Wah, wah. I don't know.
No, it's good.
That's a common artist answer. We're all a little idealist of like, how do we keep our dream machine going and still pay our bills? That's the real theme of this podcast also, probably.
Yeah, because it's the tough one. Like I said, you got to wear so many hats, and you got to, even when you have a day job, you got to kind of keep other irons in the fire. It's constant.
It's a constant juggling act. My question is, what is your go-to snack? And does it change depending on like what you're working on? Like if you're writing a sardonic robot or a creepy monster or whatever, does that seep in enough that it starts impacting things like that?
Well, that's interesting. It's interesting. It's like I've kind of been very consistent with the snacks I like. And it's like, one, I am just a sucker for cheese. I love like soft cheese, like Manchego. And cheese crackers with some of those crazy spreads, like spicy ones and tomato jams and stuff like that. It's like I could just eat way too much of that stuff. That's a great snack. You know what else I like? And my wife Lisa calls these my monster food snacks because she just can't stand it. And I love this salmon jerky. And the salmon jerky it's so great. To me, it is the best thing in the world. And she just thinks it's the most repulsive thing that I eat. And the other tip I got for people is get a snack that you love that everyone else in your family hates. Because no one's ever going to eat hey, who ate all my salmon jerky? It's never going to be that situation.
I didn't know there was such a thing. That's a top tip of the day. I think.
That is a good tip.
Oh yeah. I if this is a video pod, I got some in my drawer I would show you. But yeah, salmon jerky, cheese. Those are probably the two main ones. Salmon jerky and cheese.
Snacks are very important to the creative process.
Yeah, that's the grossest pizza in the world.
All right, Dave, I need to know, what is your favorite animal and why?
Easiest one, sloth, three-toed tree sloth. Three-toed tree sloth. Love them. I've always loved them for a long time because the one thing I love about them is, it's that idea that, the sloth idea, that it's like, they're slow, they sleep all the time, they move. My feeling always is, no, they're doing things exactly the pace they should be.
Mm-hmm.
Moss grows on their fur and they barely move and they're covered with bugs, but they're doing exactly as they should. And, and right now I'm working on, I have a graphic novel that I'm working on called Astro Sloth, and it's a sloth in space. And that's to me a zero gravity environment. I'm obsessed with space and space travel and Apollo and all that stuff. So combining these two things, sloth, definitely three-toed tree sloth.
I love it. All right. American Dave, if we really knew you, what would we know about you?
That I'm terribly introverted in my real life. I always tell people that I play an extrovert for my job and I'm a true introvert. That being like, as you remember, Casey, like being a showrunner and all that, you got a team and you got to be out there and you do presentations and all that stuff, especially for my days in the theater and doing improv comedy, very easy for me to do that. But see, I always prefer, kind of approach that as a performance, because when I was doing improv comedy and all that stuff, it was the idea that I was being extroverted or being funny or anything. And it was I'm going to interface with you in my very controlled way. And so I think the thing that, my wife knows it, but is that where some people recharge their batteries by spending time with people, I recharge by being alone. I need so badly need my alone time. And it just is something I don't think a lot of people would expect, because when I'm at work, when I'm out and about, I'm very friendly and extroverted, but I'm playing a part.
Those acting skills come in handy. You can come off warm and friendly and then go home and hang out with your paper and your robots and recharge.
Oh yeah. Spend a ton of time by myself saying nothing.
You should be a comedian. They say most comedians are introvert extroverts. So,
and writers too, I think, right? You're among your people, American Dave.
Oh yeah. No, I feel it, because it's like, and I got to say that in my life working in this business, I maintain all sorts of friendships with writers, because it's just, there's just something about, there's a funniness, there's sometimes there's a performative quality. Sometimes the thing is sometimes they're not on. It's just, I don't know. There's something about writers that I always loved. And, even more than hanging out with artists. Strange, isn't it?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, you're a writer too. You tell stories through pictures and models and things, or maybe it's just that you already have that area covered, so you don't want to hear that.
Yeah, maybe it's because I know the struggles, and when I think I talk to other artists sometimes. It's like, well, do you think this? Do you think that's like, you'd be surprised and amazed at how little thought I put into my stuff. They're not deep. It's like a painting of a deep ocean, but there's no depth.
I love that. I think that's going to be our mic drop moment. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. This has been amazing.
So much fun
you,
to talk to you guys. Very nice to meet you, British Dave.
Oh, it's lovely to meet you, American Dave. The special relationship continues. Thank you.
Bringing all the coasts together. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Quick shout out to Mike Nicholas for being our tech savior, and Carmen Sclafani, also known as Wiser Time. Thanks for our music. And thank you all for listening.